Have you ever wondered why France fell so quickly to the Germans in World War II? I get that it's probably not a question that keeps you up at night, but it's an interesting one because it never should have happened. And I think there's a lot of interesting lessons in there with broad applicability when you look at that situation in France. So, in the West, in Canada, a lot of Western countries, World War II is a big deal war for us. We study it a lot. It comes up in history classes, in museums. And growing up, the story of France, when I learned about the war, it went something like this. Germany invades 1940. They make it to Paris, they take the rest of the country. Then it becomes about learning about the French resistance and the Vichy government until the Allies invade via the Normandy beaches in 1944, liberate the country, win the war. And at not once do I remember even seeing a little blurb, a little plaque that says, and actually, this is why France capitulated so easily in 1940. It just never came up. Then I was reading about the Treaty of Versailles. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles was the treaty that, set out the parameters of how everybody in Europe was supposed to behave from thenceforth. And one of the things the Treaty of Versailles did was it tried to make it so that Germany would never be the aggressor in a war again. So they were instructed to disarm, couldn't rearm, take apart their military, destroy the military infrastructure, make reparations to the Allies. They couldn't even have like veterans organizations or cadet organizations. I mean, they were just told by the Treaty of Versailles to demilitarize everything. Now, we know from history that didn't really happen, but when you put those two things together, Germany not supposed to have any military at all, France being one of the victors in World War I and being able to keep its military, you think, wait a second, that's not really adding up. See, after World War I, France was okay. They kept their military, they kept training, drills, they invested in new technology. They were actually very concerned about future German aggression. They were concerned about that threat. They even went and built that defensive Maginot Line in the east of the country as if to say, this is where we're going to make our stand. So it's counterintuitive when you think, okay, well, if France had the superiority going into the conflict, and Germany just didn't win France, okay? We have to make that really clear. They didn't just have this huge battle and then kind of got the edge at some point due to intelligence or luck or whatever. No, they rolled right through France. France didn't even put up a fight. They got to Paris so quickly that the Germans themselves were shocked. So what happened? Now, there's never one answer, okay? And that's what I want to get into today. And that's why I'm really interested in hearing other people's takes on this or other things that you might know. There's never one answer. And the other disclaimer I want to make before I dive into my one specific thing I want to talk about is that I'm aware that Germany under the Nazi government did horrible things, and I am not praising them in any way, shape, or form, okay? One of the things that Germany did when they looked at that invasion of France was change how they used tanks. And you may think, wow, this is kind of specific and arcane, but it turned out to have a really big impact in that conflict. See, the way the French organized their use of tanks was how they did it in World War I, which was seeing tanks as to kind of complement the infantry. But tanks had really evolved in the intervening years, and the thinking around how to use tanks didn't evolve in the French military. Now, there probably were some people who are like, we got to do things differently. But the generals, the people in control, there were enough of them who didn't see the innovative potential in tanks that it didn't go anywhere. But there was a group of Germans in the German military. The seniors in the German military were similar to the French, actually. But there were enough who saw this potential use for tanks, who made an argument to create armored divisions that were intended to break through the defenses quickly and cut off the arteries that supplied those defenses, like the Maginot Line. And they were given the go-ahead. I mean, nobody knew if it would work. The German, high German military people weren't sure, but they were willing to give it a try. And it was so successful that the French couldn't respond in real time. And I mean, the Germans made it all the way to the coast and fast. So I know it's always more complicated than that. I'm not saying that it was just the use of armored tanks that, made Germany successful in the confrontation with France. But what I am saying is that one of the things that struck me when I read that story, which by the way comes from a book, I think it's just called history of the Second World War, but it's by this historian named B.H. Liddell, maybe it's Liddellhart. And he talks about how the French really prepared for the war they'd already fought. For whatever reason, they saw any future conflict that would be significantly modeled on the conflict that had come before in its tactics. Now, strategically, you can only have so many variations in a war, but tactically, especially with technological change, things shift. And it was that kind of institutional thinking that really prevented them from anticipating and responding to the small changes that a small part of the German military was making. So that's the story, and that's the broad applicability, but I'm not really sure what the takeaway lessons are. I mean, it's nothing you can throw up on a poster, right? Because it's not always like, be innovative, you're always going to be successful, because that's not true. Lots of innovations result in failure. That is the point of innovation sometimes. Learn from your failures. Maybe that's a good one. Maybe the French didn't learn, but they didn't really learn because they won, right? They won World War I, so maybe they weren't in that position. I don't know exactly what the takeaway is. I'm interested to hear what you think. I'm also interested to know if you have any other reasons for why the Germans were able to steamroll their way to Paris so effectively. Because I think there's a lot to be learned. Like I said, France was in the superior position going into World War II. They could not capitalize it. They could not capitalize it onto such a degree that it was like it wasn't, like I said, a protracted fight that they lost just by attrition in the end. Like, they lost spectacularly. And I feel there's got to be something we can learn from that. Anyways, tell me your thoughts, comments. I'm really interested to hear them. Other than that, I hope everyone's doing wonderful, as always.